Imagine a family so powerful they could make and unmake popes, so wealthy they financed kingdoms, and so ruthless they turned murder into an art form. The Medici family of Florence didn't just bankroll the Renaissance, they owned it. They transformed themselves from middle-class wool merchants into Europe's most powerful dynasty through a combination of financial genius, political manipulation, strategic marriages, and, when necessary, poison. For over 3 centuries, the Medici controlled Florence, installed family members as popes, married into royal families across Europe, and accumulated wealth that made them richer than most kingdoms. But their rise to power left a trail of bodies. Political rivals died mysteriously at dinner parties. Inconvenient family members succumbed to sudden illnesses. Enemies of the family had a disturbing tendency to develop fatal symptoms after drinking wine at Medici gatherings. This is the story of the Medici, the family that proved money could buy anything: power, prestige, popes, and, if necessary, the perfect untraceable poison. This is about how a banking family became royalty, how they shaped European history for generations, and how they eliminated anyone who stood in their way. Welcome to the dark side of the Renaissance. The Medici family's origins were surprisingly humble for a dynasty that would eventually rule Florence and influence all of Europe. In the early 13th century, they were middle-class merchants involved in the wool trade, one of Florence's primary industries. The family name possibly derives from medico, meaning doctor, suggesting that an ancestor may have been a physician or apothecary. This connection to medicine and pharmaceuticals would prove darkly ironic given the family's later reputation for poisoning. Florence in the 14th century was one of Europe's most dynamic cities, a republican government where wealthy merchant families competed for political power and social status. The city had no king or hereditary nobility in the traditional sense. Instead, power was determined by wealth, political alliances, and the ability to navigate the complex factional politics that dominated the city. Into this environment, the Medici began their rise. The family's transformation from comfortable merchants to financial titans began with Giovanni di Medici, born in 1360. Giovanni was a brilliant banker who understood something crucial. The Catholic Church needed financial services. The Church collected revenues from across Europe and needed banks to transfer money, provide loans, and manage accounts. Giovanni established the Medici Bank in 1397 and made it the primary bank for the papacy, handling papal finances and becoming the Church's most trusted financial institution. This relationship with the papacy was the foundation of Medici wealth. Giovanni's bank had branches throughout Europe: Rome, Venice, Geneva, Lyon, London, and beyond. The Medici became the Rothschilds of the Renaissance, financing trade, providing loans to kings and nobles, and accumulating enormous wealth. But Giovanni understood that wealth alone wasn't enough in Florence. He invested heavily in gaining political influence, supporting various factions, funding public works, and cultivating relationships with powerful families. When Giovanni died in 1429, he left his son Cosimo an empire. Cosimo de' Medici would transform the family from wealthy bankers into unofficial rulers of Florence. Cosimo was brilliant, ruthless, and patient. He understood that in Republican Florence, openly seeking power was dangerous. Instead, he worked behind the scenes, using the Medici Bank's wealth to control elections, place allies in government positions, and eliminate rivals. But Cosimo's rise was nearly stopped in 1433 when rival families, alarmed by Medici power, orchestrated his arrest and exile from Florence. Cosimo was charged with attempting to establish a tyranny and sentenced to exile. But rather than destroying him, the exile revealed just how much Florence depended on Medici money. Within a year, the city's economy was suffering without Medici financial support. In 1434, Cosimo's allies orchestrated his return, and his enemies were exiled instead. Cosimo returned to Florence more powerful than ever, having learned valuable lessons about how to wield power without appearing to do so. For the next 30 years, Cosimo ruled Florence without ever holding official office. He called himself a private citizen, But everyone knew the truth. Nothing happened in Florence without Cosimo's approval. He controlled elections by manipulating the selection process for government officials. He funded political allies and ruined enemies through strategic use of the bank's resources. He made Florence the cultural capital of Italy by patronizing artists, architects, and scholars, Donatello, Brunelleschi, Fra Angelico, and many others. But Cosimo also understood that maintaining power required eliminating threats, and not all threats could be neutralized through financial or political means. This is where the darker side of Medici power began to emerge. Rivals who couldn't be bought, intimidated, or politically destroyed had a tendency to die under mysterious circumstances. The Medici had access to something that gave them a deadly advantage: knowledge of poisons. Renaissance Italy was the golden age of poison as a political tool. The period produced some of history's most notorious poisoners: the Borgias, various Italian noble families, and of course, the Medici. Why was poison so prevalent? Several factors converged to make it the weapon of choice for political murder. First, Renaissance Italy was fragmented into competing city-states, each ruled by powerful families constantly scheming against each other. Open assassination risked provoking blood feuds and vendettas. Poison offered deniability. A rival dying of natural causes after a banquet was unfortunate but not openly provocative. Second, Renaissance Italy had developed sophisticated knowledge of toxicology. The rediscovery of classical texts, the development of early chemistry, and the importation of exotic substances from trade with the East all contributed to an extensive understanding of poisons. Third, and most importantly for the Medici, the family had direct access to poison through their connections to apothecaries, physicians, and the family's own possible origins in medicine. The Medici could commission poisons from the most skilled practitioners in Europe. They had the money to pay for exotic toxins imported from distant lands. And they had the political power to ensure that investigations into suspicious deaths went nowhere. The Medici reportedly maintained what became known in later centuries as a poison cabinet, a collection of various toxins suitable for different purposes. Some poisons killed quickly, useful for eliminating immediate threats. Others worked slowly, allowing the victim to sicken gradually so death appeared natural. Some were undetectable, leaving no obvious signs. Others were designed to mimic specific diseases. Arsenic was a favorite throughout Renaissance Italy. It was relatively easy to obtain, could be administered in food or drink, and its symptoms mimicked various natural diseases. Small doses over time caused gradual weakness, digestive problems, and eventually death that could be attributed to natural illness. Larger doses caused more acute symptoms, but were riskier because they were more obviously poison. Other substances in the Medici arsenal allegedly included aconite, wolfsbane, which causes cardiac arrest and respiratory failure; belladonna, deadly nightshade, which causes delirium and death; and various compounds made from toxic metals like mercury and lead. Some historians believe the Medici had access to exotic poisons from the East brought back by traders, toxins derived from poisonous plants, animal venoms, and mysterious compounds whose exact composition is lost to history. The Medici also allegedly employed professional poisoners, individuals skilled in the art of administering toxins without detection. These assassins would infiltrate households as servants, gain positions in kitchens, or bribe existing staff. They would add poison to wine, food, or even apply it to items the victim would touch. A poisoned glove, a toxic perfume, a treated piece of fruit. All these methods were reportedly used by Renaissance poisoners working for powerful families. Did the Medici actually use poison as extensively as their reputation suggests? Direct evidence is limited because successful poisoning leaves little trace. However, the circumstantial evidence is compelling. Multiple Medici rivals died under suspicious circumstances after consuming food or drink in situations where Medici agents had access. Contemporary observers frequently accused the Medici of poisoning, suggesting that such accusations were believable to people who knew the family. And the Medici never vigorously denied these accusations, perhaps because the fear of Medici poison was itself useful. One of the most notorious alleged Medici poisonings involved the death of Alessandro de' Medici in 1537. Alessandro was Duke of Florence and had been installed by Emperor Charles V. He was widely hated for his tyrannical rule and debauchery. His distant cousin, Lorenzino de' Medici, called Lorenzaccio, Bad Lorenzo, assassinated Alessandro by luring him to a meeting and stabbing him to death. But before the assassination, there were rumors that various people had attempted to poison Alessandro multiple times, all failing due to his use of food tasters and his paranoia about poison. The Medici family's ultimate achievement was placing family members on the throne of saint. Peter. Between 1513 and 1605, the Medici produced 4 popes, giving the family unprecedented religious and political power. These papal reigns brought enormous wealth and influence to the family, but also involved some of the most scandalous behavior in papal history. The first Medici pope was Giovanni de' Medici, the son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, who became Pope Leo X in 1513 at age 37. Giovanni had been groomed for the papacy from childhood. Lorenzo had purchased his son a cardinalship when Giovanni was only 13, and the family spent decades building alliances within the church to ensure his election when the time came. Leo X's papacy was extravagant and corrupt. He reportedly said upon his election, "God has given us the papacy, let us enjoy it." And enjoy it he did. Leo spent money lavishly on art, music, banquets, and entertainment. He expanded the Vatican, commissioned works from Raphael, and threw parties that scandalized even the jaded Roman nobility. This extravagance required money, which Leo raised by selling indulgences, church offices, and engaging in other practices that would fuel the Protestant Reformation. Leo's reign as Pope advanced Medici family interests enormously. He made numerous Medici relatives cardinals, ensuring family influence in the church for generations. He used papal armies and diplomacy to secure Medici control over Florence and expand Medici power in central Italy. And when political situations required it, Leo wasn't above using the church's resources to eliminate threats. During Leo's papacy, several cardinals who opposed Medici interests died under mysterious circumstances. The most suspicious was the death of Cardinal Alfonso Petrucci in 1517. Petrucci had been involved in a plot to assassinate Pope Leo X, allegedly planning to poison him through a wound treated by a corrupt physician. The plot was discovered, and Petrucci was arrested. While imprisoned in Castel Sant'Angelo, Petrucci died. The official story was that he was strangled, but rumors suggested he was poisoned before the execution could take place, possibly to prevent him from revealing other conspirators or implicating powerful families. The second Medici pope was Giulio de' Medici, an illegitimate nephew of Lorenzo the Magnificent, who became Pope Clement VII in 1523. Clement's papacy was politically disastrous, presiding over the sack of Rome in 1527 and the English Reformation when he refused to annul Henry VIII's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. But despite his political failures, Clement continued using the papacy to advance Medici family interests, arranging strategic marriages and ensuring family members held key positions throughout Italy. The third Medici pope was Giovanni Angelo Medici, who took the name Pius IV when elected in 1559. Despite sharing the Medici name, Giovanni Angelo was from a different branch of the family and only distantly related to the main Florentine line. His papacy was more focused on religious reform in response to the Protestant Reformation. The fourth and final Medici pope was Alessandro Ottaviano de' Medici, who became Pope Leo XI in 1605. His papacy lasted only 27 days before he died, allegedly from catching a cold during his papal coronation. However, rumors immediately circulated that he had been poisoned by Spanish interests who opposed his French sympathies. Whether poison was actually involved remains unknown, but the immediate suspicion of poison demonstrates how automatically people associated the Medici name with toxins. By the mid-16th century, the Medici had transformed themselves from unofficial rulers of Florence to official hereditary monarchs. In 1569, Cosimo I de' Medici was granted the title of Grand Duke of Tuscany by Pope Pius V, making the Medici legitimate royalty. This transformation from bankers to dukes was complete, but it came with new challenges and required new methods of maintaining power. Cosimo I was one of the most effective and ruthless Medici rulers. He came to power in 1537 at age 17 after the assassination of Alessandro de' Medici. The Florentine oligarchs who selected Cosimo expected him to be a puppet they could control. They were wrong. Within years, Cosimo had consolidated absolute power, eliminated political opposition, and transformed Florence into a hereditary duchy. Cosimo's methods combined his ancestors' financial acumen with military force and strategic marriages. He reformed the Florentine military, conquered the rival city-state of Siena, and expanded Tuscan territory. He married Eleanor of Toledo, daughter of the Spanish Viceroy of Naples, bringing Spanish support and a substantial dowry. And he dealt with opposition through a combination of legal persecution, exile, and, when necessary, more permanent solutions. Under Cosimo I, the Medici Secret Service became highly sophisticated. He established an extensive network of spies and informants who monitored potential threats throughout Tuscany and beyond. Dissidents who spoke against the Medici were arrested, exiled, or disappeared. Several prominent anti-Medici activists died under suspicious circumstances, with poison frequently suspected but never proven. Francesco I de' Medici, who succeeded his father Cosimo I as Grand Duke in 1574, was particularly associated with alchemy, chemistry, and the creation of exotic substances. Francesco was genuinely interested in natural philosophy and maintained laboratories where he conducted experiments. He corresponded with leading scientists and alchemists throughout Europe. But these scientific interests also gave him knowledge of toxins and their effects. Francesco's personal life was scandalous. He was married to Joanna of Austria, but had a long-term affair with Bianca Capello, a Venetian noblewoman. After Joanna's death in 1578, Francesco married Bianca, much to the disgust of the Medici family and European nobility. The marriage isolated Francesco politically and created tensions with his brother, Cardinal Ferdinando de' Medici. In 1587, Francesco and Bianca both died within a day of each other at a Medici villa. The official explanation was malaria or food poisoning from eating contaminated meat. But nearly everyone suspected poison, particularly because Francesco's death was extremely convenient for Cardinal Ferdinando, who immediately left the church, became Grand Duke Ferdinando I, and consolidated his power. Modern forensic analysis of Francesco and Bianca's remains has shown elevated levels of arsenic, strongly suggesting they were indeed poisoned, though whether by Ferdinando or other enemies remains debated. Ferdinando I, despite possibly murdering his brother, proved to be an effective and relatively benign ruler. He reformed the economy, supported maritime trade, drained swamps to improve agriculture, and generally improved conditions in Tuscany. But he also maintained the Medici tradition of eliminating threats when necessary. Several plots against Ferdinando ended with the conspirators dying under mysterious circumstances before they could be properly tried. The Medici family's ultimate triumph in securing European royal status came through strategic marriages into the French royal family. 2 Medici women became queens of France, bringing Florentine culture, sophistication, and allegedly poison to the French court. Catherine de' Medici, born in 1519, was the daughter of Lorenzo II de' Medici and a French noblewoman. Orphaned as an infant when both parents died, Catherine was raised by various Medici relatives and educated in convents. In 1533, at age 14, she was married to Henry, Duke of Orleans, the second son of King Francis I of France. The marriage was politically strategic. The French king wanted Medici money and support, while the Medici family desperately wanted the prestige of a connection to French royalty. The marriage seemed like a failure for years. Henry's older brother died unexpectedly, making Henry the heir to the throne, but Henry openly preferred his mistress, Diane de Poitiers, to his wife. Catherine was mocked at the French court as the merchant's daughter, a constant reminder that Medici wealth didn't erase their common origins. For 10 years, Catherine failed to produce an heir, and there was serious discussion of annulling the marriage. But Catherine was patient, and her patience was rewarded. She finally began having children, ultimately producing 10, including 3 sons who would all become King of France. When Henry II died in 1559 from a jousting accident, Catherine's 15-year-old son, Francis II, became king, making Catherine the Queen Mother. And when Francis died after only a year, her second son, Charles IX, became king at age 10, with Catherine as regent. When Charles died, her third son, Henry III, became king. For nearly 30 years, Catherine was effectively the power behind the French throne, ruling through her sons. She was a skilled political operator, navigating the complex religious conflicts between Catholics and Protestants that were tearing France apart. She arranged strategic marriages, negotiated with various factions, and worked constantly to preserve royal authority and her son's power. But Catherine also gained a reputation as a poisoner that has persisted for centuries. According to contemporary accounts and later historians, Catherine brought Italian methods of political assassination to France, including the use of poison. She allegedly employed an Italian perfumer and alchemist named René Le Florentin, who created exotic perfumes, cosmetics, and poisons for her use. The most notorious accusation was Catherine's alleged involvement in the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572, when thousands of Protestant Huguenots were killed in Paris and throughout France. While the massacre primarily involved open violence, some Huguenot leaders died under circumstances suggesting poison. Catherine's role in initiating the massacre remains debated, but her willingness to use extreme violence against political enemies is well documented. Catherine died in 1589, having outlived her husband and all 3 of her sons who became king. Her reputation as a poisoner was firmly established by then, with numerous deaths attributed to her throughout her decades of influence. Whether she actually used poison as extensively as accused is impossible to prove definitively, but the accusations demonstrate how thoroughly poison had become associated with the Medici name. The second Medici Queen of France was Marie de Medici, who married King Henry IV of France in 1600. Marie was the daughter of Francesco I, the Grand Duke who had died under suspicious circumstances. Like Catherine before her, Marie brought enormous wealth to France, her dowry helping to pay off French royal debts. And like Catherine, Marie became queen regent when her husband was assassinated, ruling for her young son, Louis XIII. Marie's regency was politically troubled, marked by conflicts with nobles, mismanagement of finances, and poor diplomatic decisions. She was eventually exiled from France by her own son. But throughout her time in France, accusations of poison swirled around her, particularly regarding the death of her husband Henry IV in 1610. While Henry was killed by an assassin's knife, rumors suggested Marie had prior knowledge of the plot or had even orchestrated it, though no evidence supports this. The great irony of the Medici dynasty is that after 3 centuries of strategic marriages, political manipulation, and alleged poisoning of enemies, the family was ultimately destroyed by their own inbreeding and possible poisoning of each other. By the late 17th century, the Medici Grand Ducal line was in serious decline. Centuries of marrying within a limited circle of European nobility had resulted in genetic problems. Medici Grand Dukes suffered from various ailments, weak constitutions, infertility, mental instability, and early deaths. The family that had produced such brilliant political operators in the 15th and 16th centuries was now producing weak, sickly rulers. Gian Gastone de' Medici, the last Medici Grand Duke, was a particular disaster. He became Grand Duke in 1723 and spent most of his reign in bed, rarely appearing in public, suffering from alcoholism and depression. His marriage was childless and miserable. He had no interest in governing and left administration to advisors. When he died in 1737, the main Medici line died with him, ending over 3 centuries of Medici rule in Florence. Interestingly, Giangaston's death sparked immediate suspicions of poison, though ironically, it appeared that poison might have been used to keep him alive rather than kill him. His physicians reportedly administered various compounds to treat his alcoholism and other ailments, some of which may have been toxic. Whether he was deliberately poisoned or simply killed by medical treatment is unknown. The end of the Medici brought their poison secrets to light in an unexpected way. When the Medici palaces and laboratories were inventoried after the family's extinction, investigators discovered extensive collections of chemical compounds, toxicological manuscripts, and recipes for various poisons. These discoveries confirmed what many had long suspected. The Medici had indeed maintained systematic knowledge of poison and had the means to use it. So did the Medici actually poison half of Europe, as their reputation suggests? The truth is more nuanced than the legend, but still disturbing. Direct evidence of Medici poisoning is limited because successful poisoning leaves little trace, and because the family had the power to suppress investigations. However, the circumstantial evidence is substantial enough to conclude that the Medici certainly used poison as a political tool, even if not quite as extensively as popular legend suggests. What's undeniable is that the Medici were associated with poison throughout their reign. Contemporary observers regularly accuse them of using toxins. Rivals and enemies of the Medici died under suspicious circumstances with disturbing frequency. The family had clear means, motive, and opportunity to use poison. And they never vigorously denied the accusations, perhaps because being feared as poisoners served their interests. The Medici legacy extends far beyond their reputation as poisoners. They were the greatest patrons of Renaissance art and architecture, funding Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Botticelli, Donatello, and countless others. The art treasures they commissioned are now priceless cultural heritage. They financed the development of Florence into one of Europe's most beautiful cities. They supported scholars, scientists, and philosophers. In many ways, we owe the Renaissance itself to Medici money and patronage. But this cultural flowering was built on a foundation of ruthless political manipulation, financial exploitation, and when necessary, murder. The Medici proved that banking could be a path to absolute power. They demonstrated that wealth could buy anything: political office, papal tiaras, royal marriages, and if needed, the perfect untraceable poison. They showed that a family of merchants could, through intelligence, patience, and ruthlessness, transform themselves into royalty.